The sky is wrong. It is the middle of the day, and the sun has gone out over a hill outside Jerusalem. And the men who nailed him there are starting to notice. You can hear it in the way their voices change. Soldiers who have done this 100 times, who normally talk through an execution like it's a shift at work, have gone quiet. Above the wood, a man is dying in public, on schedule, in front of his mother. And in a few moments, he is going to speak one final word, and then he is going to die on purpose at the exact moment he chooses to. You need to understand something about that word before we go any further. It is not a holy word. It is not a temple word, not a word reserved for priests or scrolls or sacred ceremony. It is the kind of word a fisherman would use closing out a bad week. The kind of word stamped onto a clay tablet when somebody finally paid off what they owed. Ordinary. Common. The kind of word you would hear in a marketplace in Capernaum on any Tuesday. Said by nobody important, about nothing eternal. And Jesus chooses it, with his last breath, as his final public statement to the entire human race. We are not telling you that word yet. Here's why. 3 Greek words show up across the story of Jesus that each claim to explain why he came. You've probably heard at least one of them in a sermon, on a coffee mug, tattooed on someone's wrist. Agape, logos, and the word from the cross, the one nobody puts on a mug, because almost nobody has heard it. This is not a vocabulary lesson. This is not a trivia question for people who like Greek flashcards. This is not a footnote some seminary professor cares about and nobody else does. This is the answer to a question that has been asked since the 1st century and never fully settled in plain English. Why did Jesus actually come? Most answers stop at love. That's a good answer. It's not the whole answer. Stay with that thought. Some answers stop at identity. Who Jesus was, cosmically, before Bethlehem ever happened. That's a better answer. It's still not the whole answer. The full answer is hiding inside a word that was so common, so unremarkable, that any merchant in the Roman world would have recognized it without blinking. And by the end of this video, you are going to hear that word the way it was meant to be heard. Not as ancient vocabulary, but as a verdict. 3 words. 1 mission. Let's start with the one most people already think they understand. There is a man who comes to Jesus at night. His name is Nicodemus, and he is not some curious bystander. He is a Pharisee, a member of the Sanhedrin, one of the most respected religious authorities in Jerusalem. Men like Nicodemus do not visit teachers from Galilee. Men like Nicodemus are visited. But he comes anyway, after dark, alone, because whatever questions are keeping him up at night are bigger than his reputation. You can imagine what that walk must have felt like. Checking over his shoulder, keeping to the side streets, knocking quietly instead of announcing himself. A man with everything to lose, risking it for a conversation he could have had in broad daylight with anyone else in Jerusalem watching. And in that conversation, in the dark, to a man hiding his own curiosity, Jesus says the most famous sentence in the entire New Testament. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. Here's what most people miss about that sentence. In the original Greek, the word for loved is not a feeling. It's a verb. Agapizin, from agape. And agape is not romance. And it's not the warm affection you feel for an old friend. The Greeks had other words for those. Eros, for desire. Philia, for friendship. Agape is different. Agape is love that acts. Love that gives, on purpose. With full knowledge of the cost, whether or not it's returned. That's not a small distinction. That's the whole point. Agape isn't a mood God was in. It's a decision God made, and then carried out. You see the same word, decades later, in the hands of a man who once hated everything Jesus stood for. His name is Paul, and before he wrote a single word about love, he hunted down people who believed in Jesus and dragged them to prison. He stood by, approving, while a man named Stephen was stoned to death for his faith. This is not a man predisposed to write poetry about love. And yet it's Paul, the former persecutor, who hands the church its most famous description of agape. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy, does not boast, is not arrogant. Love keeps no record of wrongs. Read that last line again. Love keeps no record of wrongs. Paul wrote that knowing exactly what kind of record God could have kept on him. He had a list of names. People he'd had arrested. A man whose blood was on the road he was walking when Jesus stopped him in the middle of it. If agape kept records, Paul doesn't get a second chapter in this story. He gets a cell. So here's the case for Agape, laid out as strong as it gets. A man hides in the darkness because love met him there. A song from the cross. The word himself. Love that doesn't keep score, written by a man who once made his living keeping score. Against the very people that love was for. It's a beautiful answer. For a lot of people, it's the only answer they've ever needed. Love so the world that he gave. But hold that thought, because Agape has a hole in it. And it's not a small one. Agape tells you why God acted. It does not tell you what, exactly, the action accomplished. Love explains motive. It doesn't explain mission. A man can love someone with everything in him and still fail to finish what he set out to do for them. That's not a flaw in love. That's just how love works in a broken world. Motive isn't the same as completion. So if you stop the story here, at God loved the world, you have a true sentence. You do not have the whole sentence. Something is still hanging open. Jesus didn't just come because he loved. He came to do something. And love, on its own, never tells you whether the thing got done. Here's the part nobody tells you in the version of this story you grew up with. There's a second Greek word waiting in the wings. And it answers a question Agape never even asks. It's not about why he came. It's about who exactly showed up. So here's where we are. Agape, love that acts, explains why God moved toward the world in the first place. It's real. It's in the text. It's not the whole answer. There's a second word coming. And it's going to take you somewhere Agape can't. It's going to answer a question about identity that the early church found so dangerous, so politically loaded, that it got people killed for believing it. Before we get there, if a video like this one is useful to you, the way to make sure you don't miss the next one is to hit subscribe right now while you're thinking about it. This channel exists to take words like these, words buried in old manuscripts, words most people will never hear explained, and put them back where they belong. In plain English, in front of people who actually want to understand what they're reading. 2 words down, 1 word to go. And the one we haven't named yet is the one that's actually going to answer the question this whole video is built around. Let's keep going. Long before there was a Gospel of John, there was a word floating around in Greek philosophy that had nothing to do with Jesus at all. The word is logos, and Greek thinkers have been arguing about it for centuries. Heraclitus used it to describe the hidden order behind a universe that looks chaotic on the surface. The reason behind the reason, the pattern underneath everything that happens. Stoic philosophers picked it up and ran further with it, calling logos the rational principle that holds the cosmos together, silent and invisible, present in everything but seen by nothing. If you were an educated person in the 1st century, Greek, Roman, it didn't matter. You knew this word. You debated it in school. You assumed it described something abstract, cosmic, distant, the kind of force philosophers argue about over wine. Never something you'd actually meet. Then a Galilean fisherman named John picks up a pen, and he takes that word, the most untouchable, abstract, philosophically loaded term available to him, and he does something with it that no Greek philosopher would have dared. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Pay attention to this, because it's easy to read past how outrageous that sentence actually is. John isn't writing poetry. He's making a claim. He's saying the cosmic principle, the reason behind the universe, the order Heraclitus spent his life chasing, has a face, a voice, calloused hands from a carpenter's shop in Nazareth. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. This is not philosophy. This is not metaphor. This is not poetry written to sound impressive at a dinner party. This is testimony, a man claiming to have eaten meals with the organizing principle of reality, to have watched it sleep on a boat in a storm, to have stood close enough to it on a hillside to hear it weep at a friend's grave. You can feel why this got people killed. A claim like that doesn't stay theoretical for long. Either it's true, and everything about how you live has to change, or it's the most dangerous lie a religious movement ever told. And Rome eventually agrees with that second option. Within a few decades of John writing those words, the empire is feeding Christians to lions for refusing to call Caesar Lord instead. Here's the part worth sitting with. This isn't a story floating free of history, unverifiable, the kind of thing you're just supposed to take on faith with no outside evidence at all. A Roman senator named Tacitus, no friend to Christians, writing decades later with open contempt for the movement. confirms in his own historical record that a man called Christus was executed under the governor Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius, a Roman administrator and historian, born and raised in the heyday of the Roman Empire. He held senior public office and had every institutional reason to dismiss the movement entirely. He mentions it anyway. The execution happened. Hostile sources confirm it. So now you've got something Agape never gave you. Agape told you God loved. Logos tells you who, specifically, was doing the loving, not a feeling, not an energy, not a vague spiritual presence, but the actual reasoning principle behind the universe, wearing skin, eating fish on a beach with friends after rising from the dead. It's a staggering claim, arguably the most staggering claim in the history of religious thought. And it still doesn't finish the sentence. Because identity isn't mission. Knowing who showed up doesn't tell you what he came to do once he got here. A king can walk into a room, and that alone changes nothing about whether the war gets won. The word can become flesh and dwell among us, and the question still sits there, unanswered. Dwell among us to do what, exactly? Two enormous words down. Love. Identity. Both true. Both incomplete. And this is where it gets remarkable. Because the third word isn't found in a philosopher's lecture hall, and it isn't found in a theologian's opening verse. It's found nailed above a debt, spoken once, by a dying man, with his very last breath. It's time to go back to the cross. We're back where we started. The sky still wrong. The wood still standing. The crowd beneath it going quiet. Before we get to the word, because we are finally getting to the word, one more thing. If this is the kind of thing you want explained more often, the comment section below is where I read what you want next. Tell me which word in this video landed the hardest. I read every one. Now, back to the hill. His mother is there. Mary, the same girl who once sat in a one-room house and said, "Let it be to me," is standing at the foot of a Roman execution device, watching her son die in public on a schedule he chose. There is a kind of grief that has no comparison, and this is it. A parent outliving a child is supposed to be impossible. She is watching it happen 6 feet above her head. And next to her, somewhere in the crowd, is a man whose job is to not feel anything at moments like this. A Roman centurion. He has overseen executions before. Probably dozens. This is a Tuesday for him, professionally speaking, until it isn't. Because something about this one is different. And even a hardened soldier notices it. By the time it's over, this same man will say, out loud, in front of his own men, "Truly this was the Son of God." A professional executioner becomes one of the first people in history to say it plainly. That's not nothing. That's a man whose entire career trained him to feel nothing, breaking. And right before that confession, right before the centurion cracks, Jesus speaks. One word. Remember what we told you at the start. This is not a holy word, not a temple word. It's the most ordinary word available in the entire Greek language for finishing something. Archaeologists have pulled it off ancient tax receipts, off loan tablets, off business contracts buried in the sand of Egypt for 2,000 years. The same word, stamped at the bottom, meaning the same thing every single time, paid in full. The word is tetelestai. It comes from telos, purpose, goal, completion, the end something was always moving toward. And tetelestai is what a merchant would write across a debt. The moment it stopped being owed. Not almost paid. Not mostly settled. Paid. Completely. With nothing left outstanding. Jesus says it once. And then he bows his head, and he gives up his spirit on purpose. At the moment of his own choosing. Not when his body finally gave out, but when the work was actually done. Here's the part that should stop you cold. In Greek, that word isn't just a word. It's a specific grammatical tense. Perfect tense. And perfect tense in Greek doesn't mean flawless. It means something stranger, something heavier, a completed action with results that keep going. Not it ended. It is, and remains, finished. The debt didn't almost close. It closed, and it's staying closed. Stay with that, because a man 15 centuries later nearly lost his mind over exactly this detail. His name is Martin Luther. An Augustinian monk, brilliant, terrified, convinced down to his bones that no amount of fasting, no number of confessions, no quantity of good works could ever be enough to settle what he owed God. He beat himself raw literally, trying to finish a debt he could feel but never close. Years of it. A man losing sleep, losing health, losing hope. Certain the ledger was never going to balance no matter how hard he worked the numbers. And then he understood the grammar. Tetelestai isn't, keep working, you're getting close. It's a perfect tense verb meaning the work is done and staying done. Luther didn't discover a new doctrine. He rediscovered a verb tense, and that single Greek tense helped detonate a movement that reshaped Christianity for the next 500 years because it told a tortured monk the one thing he'd never let himself believe. Stop trying to finish what's already finished. This is the part Agape couldn't reach. This is the part Logos couldn't reach either. Love explained why God moved. The Word explained who showed up. But only Tetelestai tells you the debt is actually closed. Not in progress, not ongoing, not something you're supposed to keep contributing payments toward for the rest of your life. Paid. In full. Permanently. And the stakes here aren't personal anymore, and they aren't national anymore. They're the highest stakes there are, a debt that every human being who has ever lived owed and could never pay. Settled in full, by one man, on one afternoon, with one word. That word was ordinary. The thing it accomplished was not. So here's what you actually have, now that all three words are sitting in front of you. You have agape, love that acts, love that doesn't keep a record of wrongs, love strong enough to turn a persecutor into the man who described it best. Agape tells you why he came. You have logos, the reasoning principle behind the entire universe, wearing skin. Eating breakfast on a beach with friends he'd watch die for. Logos tells you who, exactly, showed up to do it. And you have tetelestai, paid in full, permanently, a perfect tense verb stamped over a debt no one else could touch. Telos tells you what he actually did, not what he meant to do, not what he was working toward, what he finished. 3 words, 1 mission. And here's the part you need to sit with longer than the others. If tetelestai is true, if the debt really is closed, permanently, the way that grammar insists it is, then you are not on the hook to finish it yourself. Not with more effort, not with more guilt, not with one more attempt at being good enough to settle a bill that was already settled before you were ever born. You don't add a payment to a receipt that already says paid in full. You just read it and believe it. That's not a smaller claim than agape or logos. It's the heaviest one in this whole video. So tell me, out of the 3, which one hit hardest? Agape, the love that doesn't keep score? Logos, the word that became flesh? Or tetelestai, the debt that's already closed? Put it in the comments. I read every one, and I build future videos around what you tell me you want to understand next. A girl once said, "Let it be to me, in the dark," and 9 months later love had a face. A fisherman once wrote, "The word became flesh," and a cosmic principle had a name. And a dying man once said one word. Common, ordinary, the kind of thing you'd find stamped on a receipt, and for the first time in human history. A debt that could never be paid was paid anyway. It is finished.